Good afternoon, Bratislava. Good afternoon from Dublin. I feel like a sports commentator saying these couple of words. I'm very happy to be here with Ben Hurley in the Digital Hub in Dublin. Ben Hurley is the CEO of NDRC. I'm the least pertinent person in this video conference, so allow me to be extremely brief. I'm not going to introduce NDRC because Ben will do that in the next hour or so. I'm also not going to praise the opportunities here in Ireland. You are ICT stakeholders, so you pretty much know that this is the Silicon Valley version, the European version of Silicon Valley, and the hub of all the Nasdaq heavyweights, the biggest hub outside of the U.S. territory. So let me maybe introduce Ben himself. Nowadays, you tend to Google people you meet in the next couple of minutes or hours. So if you Googled Ben Hurley, you might probably discover that there is a New Zealand stand-up comedian named Ben Hurley as well. So to avoid any misunderstandings and disappointments, this is another Ben Hurley. But that doesn't mean that we can have some good time, good laughs, and good humor. As I know Ben, there will be no problem with that. Ben is, as I said, the CEO of NDRC. He's with the company since it starts in 2007, and he's the rare combination of a techie by education or background with entrepreneurial instincts, or as the NDRC webpage points it, he's an entrepreneurial innovator at heart. So I'm very happy to have him here because Ben leads NDRC investment activities, and he's the driving force behind the success of NDRC and the great and very well tailored and composed team. Ben previously held leadership roles with companies at various stages of maturity, from founding to exit, including Innovada, Broadcom, Cepro, and Ericsson. So once more, I'm very happy to have Ben here and to talk to the Slovak ICT and startup community. Slovakia is becoming a vibrant place for technologies, innovation, startups, and I think that it's hard to replicate the success and model of Ireland because that's one of a time. But I think we can learn and maybe cooperate, and then it's the perfect instance for both of these. So. Let's have a good conversation and wish you a pleasant interview.
Thank you, Mr. Metalite. I would like to say thank you for arranging this call. Thanks to you, we're able to have Ben with us. Besides, we also have on the call Valley from the Ministry of Finance, who is responsible. He cooperated on the startup strategy in Slovakia, and also Mr. Luktak, manager at So, with no further ado, I'd like to start the discussion, and then I'd like to ask questions. So please tell us a bit more about NDRC, how it started, and what was behind the idea.
Okay, thanks Petra, and thank you Dus and Du for those kind words of introduction. I'll just rotate this here a little bit so as I can see what you see a bit clearer. So how did NDRC come into existence? I guess its origins go back to 2004 timeframe, when the government determined that it wanted to do something more in the digital space. So Ireland had been investing in research for the last 15 years or so. Ireland has been increasing its investment in research activities, and it was felt that there was opportunities in the digital and online space that needed something that was closer to market than just research. So the government put out a tender, an opportunity to run what was called originally the National Digital Research Centre. So originally it was envisaged as something that would do very late stage research converting into commercial opportunity. So that was it at the outset. I think where it has grown from there is that what we found in the early days is that taking an investment-oriented approach is very important to making this work successfully. And what I mean by that is that we started out quite collaboratively. We would work with research centres, we would work with entrepreneurs, and we were building our own team of experienced entrepreneurs with a collaboration between those three parties looking to bring new ideas forward to a more market-ready position. But we found that even in doing that collaborative approach, where parties were engaged together in a project with a fairly clear goal, that it encountered difficulties at the tail end in terms of how you convert that into a company instantiation. So what we did after the first couple of years of investment was we started investing directly in ventures, taking a very much an investment orientation and an investment viewpoint, but investing at a point in time that is very early. So I would now classify NDRC as Ireland's first and earliest stage investor. We go in at a pre-seed stage, at a point where it doesn't make commercial sense for a lot of other investment funds to go in. And the reason we're able to do that is because of that connection with the state and the connection with the public funds. So as an early stage investor, that is really about making ventures happen and in many cases building ventures. The two funds that we have developed to date have been raised from public sources, where the expectation of the fund is to get some class of the return, but there's also an element of getting economic impact out of it. And the financial return can be balanced off against the economic impact. And that's what enables us to invest quite early. So what we are is a very early stage investor. We've come from being more collaboratively oriented to being very strongly investor oriented, but still going in at a very, very early stage into ventures.
Well, that's very interesting. How did you get among 25 top university business accelerators in the world? So this is the approach. Did you have a successful team, or was it just timing? How did it happen?
Very good question, Petra. So maybe if I tell you a little bit about how we do things and how that evolved over the number of years. So as an early stage investor, we're dealing with typically two parties very deeply. One party are the ventures themselves. So we're looking to connect at all times with new potential ventures, entrepreneurs, people that have research activities going on that have some commercial potential. So we're working strongly to identify those people at all times. We're also looking to connect very strongly with next stage investors. So our investment will only work if somebody else comes in following us at some stage. Typically, we would see that happening within the next 6 to 12 months after our initial investment going into it. So we're connected quite strongly as well with the angel community in Ireland, the venture community in Ireland, and increasingly the international investor community as well. And that's where the world rankings start coming into play. There is a third set of people we connect with as well, and that's corporates. We're increasingly finding that large multinationals are quite keen to engage with us to balance their own innovation activities and to broaden out their innovation scope as well, both in order to provide their staff with opportunities and learning opportunities and developmental opportunities, but also because those corporates are themselves looking to see what the next big thing is and want to be in at an early stage to understand merger and acquisition possibilities. And what we find from the corporates is that they can bring a strong domain expertise. I give you two examples of that. Recently, we ran two what we call pre-accelerators, which is they're not investment activities, but we invite a number of ventures into a workshop type environment, probably in the order of about 10 ventures. We work with them over several weeks to thrash out and validate their opportunity. And in those situations, we bring the multinationals into bear. So, for example, in the financial services area, NDRC FinTech had engagement from the likes of State Street Bank, Media Lanham International Fund. So both their leaders and their staff members coming and engaging as part of that activity. Similarly, with in NDRC Future Health, we connected with the likes of Ernst & Young and with ICON Clinical Research. So, you know, large players again in the healthcare space to bring that domain expertise to bear. So, effectively, what our very high-level model is that we're taking ventures at an early stage. So, we're connecting with the ventures, and we're bringing them to the point where they become seed investable. So, in other words, we're proving out their proposition and connecting them with venture investors as well. And what we've found that over the years that, you know, whilst we seeded the activity ourselves, we're finding that because we've now invested in over 180 ventures, and because now, you know, NDRC Ventures will have attracted over 100 million in follow-on investment, which is a pretty significant amount of investment, that we have, you know, a venture community out there, and we have a very high awareness level among the venture investor community. And those things have been strong contributors to our position in global rankings. And the global rankings, of course, are kind of geared around comparing similar accelerators in various different parts of the world. And whilst I would characterize NDRC as being an investor rather than an accelerator, we do run an accelerator model in 2 programs. And we have our NDRC Venture Lab program, which focuses on startups that are going to innovate around the business model. And then we have our NDRC Venture Lab program, which focuses on startups that have deep science or deep IP as part of their proposition. And by building both those accelerators as brands and building a strong community, and in particular showing that success, that, you know, well over 50% of our investors succeed at getting next stage investment. Those are things that have been a very important part of international recognition and international rankings. And the importance of the international rankings is when it starts to come full circle, because now we're looking at applicants coming from internationally, but also more importantly, investors coming from internationally to look at the quality of deals that are coming through our portfolio.
So that's a very impressive number of data coming through your hands. I was wondering if you could share with us some of success stories from startups through NDRC program.
Yes, that's a good point. Now, do you want to give me any guidance as to which ones the audience might be most interested in? What type of venture are they most interested in?
Well, what do you think, Gerard?
I guess most of the deals that you're dealing with. What's the typical sectors you enter the? Actually, I have a question for you. Touching upon, for me, it's really interesting. Your opinion on how do you balance between returns that you promise and the general economic impact that's also among your goals. Because I guess it's not that easy. Also, given that there are market actors functioning on an ecosystem such as angel investors or seed investors. So how do you plug it so that you create broader economic benefit, distorting the process?
That's a really good question. So I'll come to a couple of examples shortly, so to keep everybody entertained, I hope. But let me come back to that more boring question of how do you get the balance right? So, you know, our focus here is always on creating market capital, and everything beyond that we see as being a consequence. So if you create companies of value, you will naturally end up with larger employers, you will end up with jobs, you will end up with growing domestic product. So they're consequences and positive things. What we do not do is we do not put out employment grant aid programs. So there are other entities in Ireland that look at those kind of activities. We focus on creating new ventures, we focus on making sure they're viable, and then by virtue of them succeeding as ventures, employment is created. So to give an example, NDRC at this stage has created over 500 jobs, or to be more precise, NDRC-backed ventures have created over 500 jobs. And that's net jobs, including losses, because naturally in our kind of activity, some ventures will succeed and some won't. But those are 500 high-value jobs in the digital space, each of which would probably contribute another 4 times that to the economy, because of the number of spin-off and ripple effect employment that comes from that activity as well. So just to give a couple of examples on that, one of our companies is a company called Log Entries. Log Entries focuses, again, very much in the digital space. It looks at providing logging data back to developers on the use of their apps, and very useful information from a development context to understand, where to tune your app, where to tune your online systems, how to spread them out on server farms and so on. So Log Entries is one that came to us with just the idea, and we brought it through a program of where we bring them in-house. All of our ventures come in-house, so they're located in NDRC. It's a residential investment program. Over a 3-month period, they were located in our environment. We brought mentorship and connections to bear on them. We put a small amount of capital to run them, so we put in about €20,000. That was the total amount we put into it. And then we brought them to the point of them getting next stage investment. And what happened with them as a consequence of that is that Polaris Ventures in the US liked the opportunity they saw there and invested through, Polaris had a dog patch activity based in Dublin at the time as well, and invested there through their dog patch engagement as well. So that's one example. Another example is a company called Soundwave. Soundwave is a consumer play at one level, so it's about music discovery. And I urge everybody watching to sign up to Soundwave now. You can go to their soundwave.com and download their app, which has been downloaded well over 1 million times at this stage. And Soundwave enables you to discover music in a fun way, because when you move, go from city to city, you can figure out, well, who is watching what and where, or what are my friends listening to at this point in time. But I suppose the key benefit to Soundwave, whilst it has a good consumer front end, it's the capturing of the data on the music industry that is really interesting. Because in the absence of charts, and in the absence of, with iTunes there now, and different kind of purchasing mechanisms, the music industry is looking for much better data in terms of who is listening to what, where. And this is great data to provide back to bands, so they can understand, well, where should they play the next gig, what kind of even content should they play at that next gig, in order to maximize the experience for their consumers. So you've got a data analytics play on the back of an interesting consumer application in Soundwave.
Mm-hmm. So from it looks like you software startups, but in my experience, actually, these startups don't have difficulty fundraising this. Even putting the products to get to alpha or private beta stage without any funding. But not times where hardware is, and these startups are expensive, and of course need more support and capital to actually bring it to the stage. So I was wondering with now and more focus on hardware startups.
So, sorry, could I ask you to repeat that with the microphone if possible, because it was breaking up a bit?
All right.
Just the question part.
Yeah, so I was just saying that in my experience, this has a much easier time lead rounds or actually putting together prototypes as opposed to more capital-intensive hardware startups. And we see much bigger need, at least in Slovakia, of the hardware startups for additional support outside of traditional capital markets of angel investors or VCs. So I was wondering whether you also see this trend and you particularly focus on these sort of startups.
Good question. So if I understand correctly, you're emphasizing the hardware experience. What happens with hardware companies? Yeah, good. So let me start by just saying, in general, what we make sure our ventures focus on is all about validation. So we ask them not to build anything until they know there is something, they have an idea of value, right? So we nearly say, stop building and go and validate with the customer base that what you have or what you think is their problem is actually their problem. And then when you understand the customer problem, you bring it to the point of maybe then designing a solution. So how does that translate? It works quite well with software entities where you can mock up something fairly quickly. How does it translate into entities that have a hardware component? And it's a really good question. It is still about figuring out how you're going to understand the problem and figuring out what aspect of your solution leads to that design. I'll give you an example. Adaptix, which is now called Drop, which is effectively digitizing the kitchen. It has a kitchen scales that connects to your iPhone. Raised about 2 million there in the last 6 to 8 months or so. That company started out coming into us with a hardware app for your phone concept. So at the time, apps were growing in interest and so on, but they came in with something that was a bit different, which is the hardware app. And at that level, you do need to start figuring out some other elements of supply chain and how you're going to get the thing to market. So they're an important element of it to ensure that your business model will stack up. So we would encourage people to look at those elements, and I think probably everybody who's watching and listening online at the moment will be familiar with the business model canvas. It's an approach that is used, we use quite strongly. It's open source at this stage, so it's a good guideline approach. And in that business model canvas, there are practical elements of how you deliver, and these are things that you need to understand from a viability point of view at an early stage. Then it's about connecting with people who have interest in investing in the hardware space. And we have the benefit here of having a couple of international players who either are active, for example, Intel active at that Internet of Things space, or people who've got integrated supply chains for the delivery of hardware, and they're good partners you can connect with early. And they're also a source of early stage investment because of the approach that they take.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I'd like to follow up with a couple of questions on creating similar activities on government, private level that can kind of create something similar to NDRC in different countries. Is there a way to duplicate your model, or is there a recipe for success, or what are the failures we should avoid when we are trying to do something similar?
Yeah, all good questions again. Going back to our experience here, I think what we did was set up something at the outset that was needed in an Irish context. So the gap that we identified probably exists everywhere. That is the gap between the early stage concept or the deep research or the entrepreneurial potential, let's say, right? The gap between that and having something that is investable by the earliest stage investors in your country. So that gap will exist everywhere. But what you need to cross it will vary a bit from country to country, and you're looking to figure out, well, what is it that we need in Ireland? That's what we would sort of figure out. And were you looking at this in terms of Slovakia? You would need to look at it to figure out what is it you need in a Slovakian context. If you look at the Valley, for example, it's 40 to 60 years old at this stage, huge amount of capital out there, very, very well networked in concentrated locations for hardware and then for software, and very strong interconnectivity. And those were ingredients that were to some degree missing in an Irish context when we first started going. And so a large part of what we did was focusing on just helping ventures make those first couple of steps, but also creating the right environment around the edge of that by connecting with other state agencies and connecting with other ecosystem players. So connectivity is a huge part of it in order to bring it forward. And it's not to say that you can just pick what we have going here and export it to Slovakia, but you could certainly build something that leverages off the experience here. I think another thing that we commented is that at the outset, we focused on bringing experienced people into the team early. And this was an important thing as well, is that to avoid running it in a programmatic manner, and more to make it somewhat more organic and experience-led from the outset. So iterate early, iterate fast, learn as you're going, but be very concentrated on doing that. If you try to design the perfect program from day one, you'll probably fail, and it'll probably take a long time. So it's to come up with something that feels like it should work in the system, and then iterate on that. Again, that comes back into play in terms of the nature of the fund that's going into play. That hybrid fund, that there isn't an expectation of full commercial return. So, you know, a balanced return is very important. So, you know, some portion of the fund hopefully will come back in for reinvestment, but understanding that of itself the fund cannot be self-sustaining. It is sustainable with public support and backing behind it. So that's pretty much a summary in that point.
Thank you, Ben. So what was the role of government? Where do you see the government helping funds or accelerators like this? And I would like to ask Peter maybe to comment on this one as well, how Slovakia is trying to deal with this one.
Yeah. If I may, just a short introduction. It's very interesting how you are trying to approach actually the investment gap in Ireland. We have similar problems, and that's how we are trying to face also these problems and the assessment that we have done. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we have done some assessments of the startup environment here in Slovakia, and one of the conclusions is that the business angel and the seed investments are quite lacking in our country. So, in fact, for mature startups, there is enough resources where finance can be identified, especially the venture capital funds co-financed by the European Union, and also the cooperation of these funds with the private investors. However, the most risky stages of startups are financed badly, and there is lack of business angel investments. There is also lack of crowdfunding activity, and actually your activity, the NDRC, seems to me as also another solution for coping with this problem of very early stage investments. So we are talking about investments up to 50,000 euro, which are needed in the most risky stages of the startups. And what I'm really interested in, what is the difference between what the NDRC is doing and, for instance, the business angel investments or crowdfunding? I know the method is different, but how is it, for instance, better, or why should startups rather choose NDRC than other sources of alternative finance? And who is, I still didn't understand, who is actually, who are the subjects who are investing through NDRC to startups? Are you some kind of a crowdfunding platform who created a fund out of private investments and state investments, and then you are reinvesting it to startups, or how does it actually work? I might have heard it in a wrong way or something, but I didn't hear this kind of information from your presentation. I would be very interested to hear that.
Okay, very good. No, I'm very happy to clarify stuff I said earlier as well. So you identify a very similar gap to what we had found in Ireland, which is the gap between that very early stage and getting them to being investor ready. Again, the Series A and Series B and so on, that seemed to be reasonably active in the country, but the real problem was deal flow at earlier stages. And the phrase that comes to mind here a little bit is one that we would never use with our startups. So we would never advise a startup to build it and they will come. We always advise our startups to ask them what they need first of all, or understand their problem, and then after that build it. But when it comes to bringing investment into a country, and particularly later stage investment, it's important to build the deal flow and the pipeline at that very early stage to begin that. So really that's where the focus was from an NDRC point of view, was how do we get more stuff happening at that early stage where they're at the most vulnerable in a gap. Then you come to the point about, well, should you encourage angels to go earlier? or does crowdfunding come into play in addressing that gap? And I think both of these do play a role. Just to clarify where NDRC's funds come from, we have raised those funds from the state. So they are public funds. There is a very modest, very small amount of private mixed into the overall mix. The vast majority is public fund. So any windfall profits or any windfall benefits go back into the public sphere as well, right? But they're public funds and they come in at that early stage. We would typically invest in companies that have, you know, in some cases they will have some other private component going in alongside our investment. So that could be the founder's own time and effort and money, or it could be that they have some other very early stage backers on board. But because NDRC is there providing both investment and the structured program around it, they're inclined to invest at that early stage as well. So NDRC is acting as the attractant of other investment money. So in response to the question of you know, would you just what is different from the business angel community? What is different from you know, crowdfunding? And on that front, I think because of our investment is very much a fusion between financial capital and human capital. So on the financial capital side of things, there is somewhere in the order of between 20,000 and 100,000 is what we'd invest in ventures. We have invested more, but that's typically the range in which we invest at the present time. It's a fusion of that financial capital with the human capital. So you cannot get investment from NDRC without being resident in NDRC and without participating fully in our investment program. And that program brings mentorship, our own people directly engaging with you, a structured set of things and goals to be achieved over time, and a very strong structure around it, which you typically would not get, you know, in a business angel or a crowdfunding environment. You know, business angels will obviously bring their own direct experience to bear, which is very valuable, and we would tap into that through informal connectivity and mentorship, and that's a very welcome thing of what we do. Typically, again, you wouldn't get that in a crowdfunding situation, and I suppose one of the differences there as well is that, you know, as investors, we have built up a good process around how we select the ventures we're going to invest in, and we do that on the basis of what we strongly believe are going to be long-term commercial successes. Obviously, one of the benefits of crowdfunding is that it can actually connect you to a strong consumer base as well, because not only those investing in your product providing you some modest amount of capital, but they're probably investing in things that they've been interested in, so you're also building up a customer connection. But again, I think our differentiation there is that, you know, as professional investors with a professional program that is a fusion of the capital and the experience, that would be a real differentiator on that front, and again enable a higher success rate coming out of those, and cater for perhaps a more challenging type of venture where it would be difficult for a crowdfund to support that venture.
Okay, thank you. So your fund is rather focusing on the very risky stages of entrepreneurship, of startups, right? Because it's early stage money. That's when actually entrepreneurship is quite risky, or riskier than in the stages which are eligible for venture capital investment. So how do you actually cope with the large risk of this early stage investment? And what is the diversification of your investments?
Okay, so risk and diversification, again, two good questions. The first way we deal with risk is to accept there is a significant amount of risk involved. So the return expectation of the fund is geared towards the risk that's inherent in it. It's important for us not to be risk averse, because otherwise that will get in the way of us doing the core job of enabling new ventures to emerge. So the second way we manage the risk is by ensuring that our investment carries with it that requirement to be involved in the program. So to be resident, to be located in NDRC. NDRC is not just your typical incubation center. I think, Dushan, you have seen NDRC, and the layout here is that the ventures are in a very open plan environment. There are no office doors. They are sitting in teams of 3 to 4 people, very close to each other, so a lot of experience and interaction between them. But most importantly is that our own team in NDRC is equally embedded. They're sitting in that same open space environment right beside the teams on a daily basis. So the approach of a very strong partnership model and intimate relationship with the ventures goes a huge way towards reducing that risk, because we're with them during the period as well. And then, of course, it's down to the selection practices we have at the outset. But again, in those, we have to accept that there is a risk around selection, but the way we work against that is we look for ventures that are addressing a big market. So we look for ventures that have a big market, where the problem and the solution are reasonably clear and seem to be intuitively sensible, where the team is strong. So we're looking for a team that has strength and is a good mix between commercial, technical, design, and other elements that you might want. And also that we have a sense for you can monetize this in some way, that there is some way of figuring out a revenue stream in some period of time. Now again, because none of that can be proven before our investment, it is a case of just weighing those things up and measuring accordingly. On the diversification side of things, we invest in anything that has a digital beating heart. So it's quite open in that regard, anything that has some connectivity with digital and where we feel ourselves that we have enough in-house competence and experience to add value to that venture. So one of the things we will look at and ask ourselves when we're looking at an opportunity is, can we enable this venture to move the dial through our own expertise and connections as well? And the diversification would kind of bring in things from fintech through to health tech, through to entertainment, and other areas as a result of that.
Perfect, thank you, Ben.
Ben, I have an additional question just to better understand your business model, and that's with respect to incentive schemes. So I understand you're a private entity funded by the government. Are your incentive schemes similar to standard venture funds with the management fees and carried interest, or it's managed in some other way? And is the company actually investing its own money alongside the government, or how does this work?
Yeah, they're good questions too. And given where we've come from in history, it's safe to say that has changed over time and probably will change further as well as we develop the enterprise. So at the outset, it would have been very much a standard, salary-oriented type of structure. And what we've introduced over time is performance remuneration based on the performance of people, but also based on the performance of the overall fund. And those things, to my view, are absolutely critical to ensure that our own people are engaged with a view to the success of the ventures, because clearly the venture success leads then to NDRC success and individual success in NDRC. So I wouldn't say that what we have in that is perfect or an exact replication of what would happen in a venture partner structure, but it brings in performance mechanisms which are tied to the core activities of finding great ventures and then helping those ventures to be as successful as they can possibly be.
All right, thanks. And one additional question. I was wondering, you mentioned tickets between 20K up to 100K, and that's often, where angel investors invest. And I met a couple of Irish business angels, and I was wondering whether you oftentimes find yourself competing for deals with these guys.
We would not typically find ourselves competing for deals with the angels, because our view is that if it's strong enough to attract full commercial investment, then the deal is probably through the gap already, and our ability to make a significant impact on that venture is probably reduced at that stage. But what we have found again and again is angels and seed investors referring ventures to us because they like the idea, they like the proposition, but it's too risky for them to take on board, and they would look at perhaps saying, we will come in as a follow-on investment if you take them through the first phase, because we know that we will bring it to a point of validation. So it's our experience is that even though at a macro level you would expect different segments of the market to compete for these things, the startup sector, because companies are so vulnerable, requires a lot of collaboration between all the ecosystem players. We connect strongly with the angel community. We will have an investor day, for example, on the 17th of June here, at which we'll have well over 150 investors locally and internationally looking at the next group of ventures coming out of NDRC. And this will be from angels right through to later stage VCs. So they understand the activity as well. They understand that it's not about finding the lucky one. It's a case of repeating this over time means that you need to work and collaborate with your ecosystem.
Actually, I totally agree with you, because we found from our experience that actually many angel investors consider us or our seed fund as a tool for them for follow-on funding for the companies that they invested in. And I think it totally changes the strategy that these people operating on the market can have, and also their expectations regarding the returns, because oftentimes they are not able to fund these companies on their own in future rounds. And as they understood that there's another opportunity to fund these companies, they're now making smaller ticket sizes that spread the risk. And I think this will, in the medium to long term, result in much better ROI on their side, so more money coming back to the ecosystem. So that's great. And I have a last question regarding your business model, if I may, and that is, if you believe that one day even your strategy could be, kind of totally market oriented and having returns that will be at the market rate, because we love risk just because it's something that can be managed, and that's the exciting part of the job, I guess, right?
Yeah. So if I understand the question there, so could it go to the point where it's fully self-sustaining? Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one we ask ourselves often. I think the nature of really early stage investment is that it has risk that is not attractive to private investment. That's fundamentally it. Now, the bar can move a little bit from the left to the right as to what level of risk the market will bear at any point in time. But if you want to have stuff happening at really early stage, then you need to understand that some form of public investment structure is very useful in that regard. And where we would see ourselves going as a business is adding in later stage funds to what we currently have in place. So sourcing funds from other private sources, which can come in and benefit from the pipeline of investment activity that we have in place already. And that's something we're currently working on, and would certainly be part of our vision for the future, is bringing seed funds closer connected to what we might call as being the pre-seed phase activity that we're involved in at the present time.
If I may pop up with one question also, my understanding is that you are internationally operating institution. Ben, do you have right now some Slovak startups or people from Slovakia in some of your teams? Or which countries are typically the now partners of NDRC, which you have now in your portfolio?
Yeah, that's a good question also, and a nice little lead-in. So we have invested in companies that have come from Italy, Norway, UK, Canada, so, quite a variety of countries throughout Europe and abroad. Today, we will be launching the open call for NDRC Launchpad, which is our business model innovation program. And that's a call for ventures who would participate in an investment program for about 3 months based here in NDRC. They'll get about 20K each. And that call will go out internationally. So please watch out for that call, because any of the ventures that are online and listening would be more than welcome to apply. Our selection criteria are that we are looking for the best. So it is a quality-based decision. We invest on merit alone. We do require the companies to have some incorporation in Ireland, but that isn't to the exclusion of having a location elsewhere as well. I think our experience has been, in some cases, it's been up to 20% of our investment intake has been international in any of our cohorts. But we at the same time, we don't set ourselves a minimum threshold of international ventures. We are looking for the ones that are just the best of all that we see, whether domestic or international.
May I? Sorry, so you mentioned that the companies need to be partially incorporated in the Irish law. So would it be possible for a Slovak registered limited company or joint stock company to apply for this kind of investment support or become member of the NDRC?
Yeah, so our requirement would be that they incorporate in Ireland. So at least they have an entity that is incorporated in Ireland, and that's the entity that's being developed. What relationship they would have then with the Slovakian one, I mean, that's open to understanding. We don't have a strict kind of barrier on that. So I suppose in one sense we're a bit different to other types of state supports in that regard. Enterprise Ireland would quite clearly have another agenda, which is a very important one about ensuring companies are fully growing here. But the amounts we're investing are in this very early stage are relatively small compared to everything else. So we tend to think there's, some will stick, some will stay, some will move back on, and that's a serendipitous and a good thing to have happening, because if you try to close it off too early at that early stage, you're basically reducing the number of opportunities that can develop. And a mobile opportunity is a good opportunity, and so many ventures in the digital space are mobile today. That's something we cater for as well, with the view that it'll all come back to bear at some stage on the fund as well, because that community and connectivity aspect of it that comes from that is very, very important also.
And what are the royalties that the state actually gets back from these companies? Because you mentioned that most of the money comes from public resources. So does the state get back some kind of royalties, or is just a risk from the side of the state to support the economy and maybe new or additional employment in Ireland?
So there is an expectation that the fund will realize some returns, and those returns, if they go over a certain amount, will actually go back into the state coffers. If they stay under a certain amount, they get reinvested into the activities. So in other words, they go into investing in more startup activities. So the state is getting a double benefit there. It could actually realize cash directly back into the exchequer coffers, but it's also realizing increased investment in this early stage space. So that's the returns. In addition to that, the benefits for the state are obviously the jobs numbers. Strong jobs numbers in a digital economy that have strong ripple effects in the economy. And secondly, then the market capital value that is resident in the state. So at this stage, NDRC ventures are worth over €250 million, and that's €250 million, gross domestic product that is better than none. So it's a valuation in the marketplace which is better for the economy benefits from that.
What is the amount of the fund, or what is the height of the fund that the state created for this activity?
Two funds, the total at this stage is 43 million under management.
Okay.
So I just wanted to ask, so potentially startups from Slovakia can join your program Launchpad, and they can basically come back and get investment in Slovakia. So that's a possibility.
That is also a possibility, yes. We would require them to be based here. One of the things they will, I suppose, experience here is what can be done in a Dublin context, which is quite good. So, but having said that, some will certainly wish to migrate back, and some will probably look to put down some sort of roots here to build off the network connection. But the benefit of that is, from a Slovak economy point of view, as I would put it, is that if you have startups in international locations connecting back to your home base, that's a very strong international connection, a strong experiential base for those for the rest of the startup community in Slovakia. One of the things that Ireland has benefited from over the years is a large amount of multinational investment in the digital space, and that has driven people to emigrate and work abroad, driven people to build ventures abroad, but it's also quite a few of those people have come back to relocate in Ireland, build their ventures here, and moreover there's a very strong international connection community available to new startups that are starting in Ireland to reach out to based internationally as well. So whilst when you're looking at it from an economic point of view, you need to go beyond just the location of the venture and think in terms of what you're doing about an international community of Slovak entrepreneurs and their connection back to home base.
Mm-hmm. All right, you mentioned that the startups are located in your incubator and that they are also cooperating alongside the ventures or the venture teams that are also present at NDRC. Is that correct?
When we invest in a startup, they have to locate in NDRC.
Okay.
They locate in a very open plan office environment.
Mm-hmm.
So they're sitting beside other ventures we have invested in.
Okay.
And they're also sitting beside our own team. Mm-hmm. So on the same open plan floor, you might have anywhere 10 to 12 startup ventures sitting side by side, with probably half of our team located right beside them on one floor, and the same on another floor in NDRC.
Mm-hmm. And NDRC, is it a private company or a public institution?
And the membership of that company is 5 research institutions. So that's how it's structured at the present time. In other words, it's yes.
You were just muted in the beginning, and I didn't hear if it's public or private.
Yeah. So NDRC is a private company, but it's a company limited by guarantee. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. Do you have exactly that same concept? Okay, maybe not. So, and what that means is that even though it's set up as a limited company, the membership of NDRC are not shareholders; they are members, and the members, there's 5 members, being 5 research institutions, mm-hmm. which universities, 5 universities, which themselves are public institutions.
Mm-hmm. And was there some kind of public procurement for appointing NDRC as the institution that will receive the funds from the public sources, or who appointed you to become the one to get the sources from the government?
Yeah, so the government put out a tender, a call for proposals to manage and operate an NDRC, a National Digital Research Centre. There was perhaps in the order of about 3 or 4 different consortia who bid for that against that call, one of which was successful, and that was the consortium comprising the 5 universities I just mentioned. So it came through a public procurement activity at the outset. The second fund we raised came as a kind of a follow-on to the first one as a renewal. It's likely that they'll probably go to procurement again at some stage in the future.
Mm-hmm. All right. So would you be considering bringing your know-how and your model to Slovakia if there would be a program started for these kind of activities?
Or like a franchising, like McDonald's.
Yes. No, it's a good question, and again, we're always looking at that. I suppose, in the first instance, we operate an investment model, so the investment case would need to stack up. And in looking at the investment case, the way we'd approach it is, well, let's see what Slovakia startups have to offer in the first instance. So maybe if a few applied for NDRC Launchpad, we would see, okay, well, how deep and how good a quality is that compared to what we're seeing elsewhere? And that would be something that could lead to further types of engagement activities. You know, as an investment model, we don't do it. We don't charge for services to our startups. We're investing in them, and part of the investment is our own time and effort. So that's the model we'd be looking to replicate anywhere where we're doing that. And the best way to go about that is looking at the quality of the deal flow first of all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ben. I have just one question from the audience. How would you sum up the key points to building a good, vibrant startup ecosystem?
Now that's $1 million question. The key points for a vibrant ecosystem. I suppose, you know, in the first instance, it's having something that is really focused on investment at that early stage. I think, you know, NDRC, I don't lay claim to driving the whole ecosystem here, but NDRC's existence and our focus on taking an investment approach has really helped to engage a lot of parties in other parts of the ecosystem. So having something in place that acts as a starting point for worthwhile ventures, making sure that that entity is very strongly mission focused, it understands what it's trying to achieve, to get ventures from that early stage to the point where they're investable by next stage investment, is critical to it as well. And then outside of that, it's bringing the right smarts to bear, putting the right kind of programmatic enablement alongside the investment, and then reaching out to community. And I'm going to use community there in a very broad sense, and building a sense of community as well, right? So the community being previous investees, the community being angels, the community being successful entrepreneurs, and convincing them that it's worthwhile spending time with the likes of NDRC, because they know that you know, their learnings, their experience will be brought to bear on the venture. So there's a real kind of impact that they can have through a close association with something like NDRC. So it is building around those kind of things, and strong ecosystem connectivity with other players. Like in Ireland, it's connection with Enterprise Ireland, connection with the government, the relevant government departments on the communications side, on the jobs, enterprise and innovation side, also on finance. So connecting with those parties as well. So they're kind of some of the key ingredients to building a strong and vibrant ecosystem around that. And after a while, what you will find is the grassroots mechanisms, which I think you have some grassroots mechanisms already in place, that they will become stronger and stronger in support of that overall ecosystem also.
Great. Thank you so much. With that, I would like to ask if anyone else has any more questions to ask Ben. If not, we would like to thank you, Ben, for the valuable discussion. It's helped us a lot, and I hope later on our startups and government organizations will have a chance to view this discussion and maybe get in touch with you to pick your brains on various topics. So thank you very much. Mr. Metal, I thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jaro, and have a lovely afternoon.
Okay, thank you too. And just remember that the call for Launchpad will be open later on today. So for those entrepreneurial Slovakian ventures, please look at that, and we'd be very happy to engage and see what's there.
Dublin is much closer than Palo Alto, so try to take this shortcut.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.